Hey, good evening, Bio 202 students. Like I spoke during lecture today, I'll be doing this focus session, part of the endocrine system. For those that did not stay after class to watch it, basically, I will be hosting these sessions after lecture on Tuesdays, and then I will send out a recording of this lecture um, to those for those that can't attend on right after lecture, especially if you have other classes or other priorities, or just for those that want to rewatch. There's a couple different times to prepare for the exam. So, um, kind of like what these sessions are, they are part of our. There we go. Sorry about that. So they are part of our participation points in the class. So Dr. Curley and I will come together and just kind of evaluate participation. Dr. Curley has some metrics, and then I use primarily the focus sessions just for people that attended. And as long as you attend, it used to be seven, but attend as many as you can, and participate in class, you'll get your participation points. So it's pretty easy to do. These only really take 15 to 25 minutes, and primarily they're used to for me to focus in on different things in the modules that we're on that I've seen students struggle with over the last 5 semesters. I'll also, um, I won't be including the live Zoom option this semester just because of how close we are on time, but I will do the in-person and then send a video recording either that evening or Wednesday morning at the latest. And then I will also be doing exam reviews uh, in the focus session. So next week kind of rolls right into this announcement. Next week is our endocrine lecture exam. So I'll be doing the exam review on Monday, or sorry, Tuesday after lecture, and then I'll send it out to everyone on Tuesday evening. So we're almost there already. So this Bio 202 does run a little bit quick just because we have so many different things to cover. Should be expecting a new exam every 2 weeks for each of the different modules. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start this with the glands of the endocrine system. So now we've already had our Tuesday lecture. Today's we have last Thursday, and I'm pretty sure the first Tuesday was just kind of like a get to know each other. So really, we've had two lectures already, kind of covering the endocrine system. This is part of your lecture notes. Biggest things I want to highlight here is the big glands and kind of what they do in our body. So the glands are responsible for secreting and producing some of these hormones that get released in our body to regulate multiple different functions. The ones that I want to highlight primarily the hypothalamus. They produce the ADH, oxytocin, and the regulatory hormones that then act on the anterior pituitary gland to secrete other hormones. We've talked about these a lot in class. We talked about the thyroid gland, T3, T4, and calcitonin. T3 and T4 are basically the same thing. T3 is the active hormone, and then T4 or thyroxine is like an inactive version of it. So it just kind of circulates in your body till it's needed. And once it gets the signal to activate, it becomes T3, and then T3 will then go and do all of the different functions that the thyroid T3 hormone does. We talked about the adrenal glands, primarily the medulla and the cortex, and how they each uh, are responsible for different parts of the to secrete different things in the body, and they're responsible for different things considered vital or non-vital functions. And I'll cover that here in a couple slides. We talked about the pancreas, primarily insulin and glucagon. Understand that these are used to regulate blood sugar or glucose in the body, and how that process works is something you definitely want to study, and it should be covered later on in your notes. And the pineal gland and parathyroid gland, they only really release the one hormone, and they're not as, I would say, for the purpose of this course, they're not as important as the glands I have on my left, especially considering that the pineal gland only releases melatonin and the parathyroid gland only releases parathyroid hormone or PTH. The ones on the left, if you get those, you can miss or not get the pineal gland and parathyroid glands hormones down, or you can forget them if you want, compared to the ones on the left that if you can't get the glands and the hormones on the left side of the chart, you're going to really struggle on the exam. Okay, so I did briefly cover this, and I know Dr. Curley mentioned this as well. What exactly is the hypothalamo-hypophyseal system? So the system is primarily the way that the hypothalamus communicates or regulates the pituitary glands. So uh, the hypothalamus will use neurons to uh, talk with or send signals to the posterior pituitary gland. That is considered the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract system. So think track like running. And then for the anterior pituitary gland or the adenohypophysis, this is considered the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. And portal is just another biology word for um, like fluids or blood. So anything that's a portal system is primarily something that runs through the blood. So as we kind of talked about today in lecture, the uh, hypothalamus will primarily release oxytocin or produce oxytocin and ADH, and these are considered what are called neurohormones or chemohormones. You don't need to know that term for this class. It's a little bit of a higher level class phrase, but essentially they're just chemicals um, chemicals that act as hormones. So these signals or these hormones, ADH and oxytocin, will travel from the hypothalamus, will be um, created. They will then make it to the posterior pituitary gland or the neurohypophysis, and they'll circulate and they'll kind of stay ready. If you kind of think about it, you don't need to retain water all the time with ADH, and you don't really need oxytocin 24/7. Oxytocin is the love hormone. Makes you feel all nice and bubbly when you're with your loved ones, your kids, your spouse, your dog, whatever it might be. It's also very important during childbirth, and also helps with milk production. Versus prolactin, which we'll talk about much later. Prolactin is uh, there to release um, breast milk versus oxytocin, which helps produce breast milk. But again, that's another thing we'll talk about later. Um, like I said, we don't always need those ADH and oxytocin, but they are ready to go in case you need it. So something I brought up for the in-person students today was if you need to retain water, you do not have time for that hormone to be produced by the hypothalamus, make its way to the adenohypophysis, and then that hormone will tell the uh, adenohypophysis or the anterior pituitary gland that I need you to produce these other hormones to then go do a function. So the difference between the neuro and the adeno is that the neurohypophysis hormones, they are produced and they are ready to go in the posterior pituitary gland. So as soon as you feel dehydrated, or even technically before you feel dehydrated, your body will know and it's going to immediately release the ADH hormone into the bloodstream to then start retaining water in the kidneys. Same thing for oxytocin. If you are in childbirth, you don't have time for the very slow, relatively slow portal system to then go through your entire bloodstream and eventually make it to your body, to your I guess I'll say to your vagina in this case. You need that oxytocin ready to go to start contractions so that you can have a successful childbirth. Um, Oxytocin itself is also what's called on a positive feedback loop. So the more oxytocin you release, the more oxytocin your hypothalamus will create to then keep your contractions going until you deliver successfully. But again, the North hypothesis is a track. It's very fast. So it'll produce the hormones, it'll have the hormones circulating and ready to go, and it'll release the same hormones when the body needs them. The adrenal hypothesis or the anterior pituitary, the other hormones made by the hypothalamus, not including oxytocin and ADH, those hormones are basically production or inhibiting hormones. And I'll kind of show that here on the next slide. Essentially, what those hormones are there to do are to tell the anterior pituitary gland to make other hormones to then do the jobs it needs them to do. So, for example, if I say I'm a child and I need to grow, the hypothalamus will create um, growth hormone. Give me one second. Excuse me. So it'll make growth hormone releasing hormone, which will then travel through to the adrenal hypothesis or the anterior pituitary gland, and it'll tell it, I need you to start producing growth hormone. So then the anterior pituitary will start making that growth hormone, and then it'll secrete it into the blood, and it'll eventually get to wherever it needs to go. Um, in our case, if you're growing like a child, it'll grow everywhere. If you're an adult, you don't really need growth hormone. It's more used when you need to like repair something, or if you need to increase things like muscle mass or whatever. Hopefully that explains the hypothalamic hypophyseal system. It's very straightforward once you kind of think about it. Just know there's two different loops. There's the very fast tract loop that is a nervous or a nerve cell, so the neurohypothesis, and that is there to just produce oxytocin and ADH so the posterior pituitary gland can release that same hormone when it's ready. The portal system is used by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will make hormones to tell the anterior pituitary gland to make other hormones to go do other things. So it is a much slower system. If you have questions about this, just feel free to message me, or we can talk on Tuesdays after lecture. Okay, the one thing I really wanted to kind of cover is we gave you this big chart in class to kind of fill out and start putting down the stuff that we kind of talked about, the what hormone gets produced, where it gets secreted, where does it act upon. As a list, it's very nice because you can kind of put it all together in one piece of paper. But as far as learning it, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to learn it that way. So what I recommend for you to do is to put it all together in your own words or in your own way. So what I did as a student for Dr. Curley was what you see in front of you now. I went to the library, I checked out a room, I have a big whiteboard, and I just try to write everything down, color code it, and link it all together. So kind of talk through how I organized everything was on the left, these orange hormones are all hormones produced by the hypothalamus. So ADH, oxytocin, um, growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, prolactin inhibiting, prolactin release, TRH, CRH. So I put those all together, color coded as orange, so I know the hypothalamus produces these hormones. Then I split it up into two different groups. I had which hormones go to the posterior pituitary gland, which are these top two, and that's color coded in blue. And then which hormones go to the anterior pituitary gland, which are color-coded in green. As you can kind of see, the way I broke it down is hormone, where does it act on? So I'll use ADH. ADH goes to posterior pituitary and waits, and then it gets acted on, it acts on the kidney. So in the kidney, or once you need ADH to retain water, the posterior pituitary will release ADH. It'll start interacting with the kidney, and it'll force the kidney to retain water. And we'll cover that when we get to the urinary system much later in the course. I recommend having the hormone, where it acts, and a brief description, doesn't have to be long, of like what that hormone does. That way you just understand how that hormone works. You can kind of see on the anterior pituitary gland that the orange hormones act on the anterior pituitary, but then the anterior pituitary gland will make other hormones to then carry out the functions that the hypothalamus wanted to be carried out. So I'll use one that we talked about today. I'll talk about TRH. So, excuse me. So TRH is thyrotropin releasing hormone. That will get secreted by the hypothalamus. It'll act on the anterior pituitary gland, and it tells the anterior pituitary gland that I need more thyroid stimulating hormone. So anterior pituitary gland will make that thyroid stimulating hormone, and then it'll go and act on the thyroid. The thyroid will then go ahead and produce T3 or T4 or calcitonin. T3, T4, like we mentioned in class, it's used throughout the entire body, helps with metabolism, growth, and temperature regulation, among other things. It's used everywhere. And then calcitonin is used to lower calcium in the blood. One thing that I kind of linked here was the parathyroid gland. The thyroid and parathyroid kind of work together to regulate calcium in the blood. So the thyroid releases calcitonin, it drops calcium or reduces calcium in the blood, whereas the parathyroid releases PTH or parathyroid hormone, which will increase calcium in the blood. TSH doesn't directly affect the parathyroid, but I grouped it together so I can see that one lowers calcium in the blood and the other raises calcium in the blood. And really, they're basically the same, thyroid and parathyroid. They kind of match. On the right here, you can see that I put like the pineal gland, the thymus, and the pancreas. Just know for the pancreas, it decreases blood glucose or increases blood glucose. For the exam, you might be asked if it's done by the alpha or beta cells in the pancreas. Insulin is decreased, or insulin is secreted by beta cells, and glucagon's created and secreted by the alpha cells. That might be a test on or a question on the test. That's why I wrote it down. But the other thing to understand for glucose and that regulation is that it's glucose in the blood. That's where the body senses how much glucose you have. So when I eat, like I just had dinner, I'm going to have a spike in blood glucose as my body starts digesting and absorbing the food or the energy I've got. That is going to cause a spike in my blood glucose levels. And so the pancreas will start secreting beta cells, or sorry, the pancreas beta cells will start secreting insulin to start reducing my blood glucose. What insulin will do is it'll tell my cells to open up and start absorbing some of that glucose so that they can then convert it into energy. Any glucose that my cells do not need for energy will then be saved in my lipids or my fat cells. And so the more sugar you take in, I'll just say glucose, that is, the more glucose you take in that's not being used by your cells actively will get stored for future use. We'll talk about this later in the digestive and urinary system, but the body does not get rid of glucose. It'll um basically the term is that it retains glucose at 100%. So it doesn't matter how much sugar you take in, the body isn't going to waste any glucose because it's a valuable energy source. If you think about cavemen and some of the older human history, you never were guaranteed 3 meals a day. You were lucky to maybe eat once every couple of days, especially if you're like a caveman or whatever. And so the body has evolved to value glucose more than other things. And so when you take in glucose, the body's going to store it because it's afraid that you might need it and you won't be able to get it. Today, in our modern society, we can basically eat whenever we want, especially here in America. And what ends up happening is that we probably consume more glucose, especially like with some of the artificial sugars, than our body actually needs. But our body's always going to retain it. Um, Conversely, on the glucagon side, if you haven't eaten in a while, I think I shared with some of you that I fasted yesterday for about 24 hours. So what happens in the first, from eating, you start digesting for about 2 to 4 hours, and then that food or that energy will then be moved to your small intestine, where that's all where the absorption happens, and eventually in your large intestine, where the waste will then get removed from the body. If you do not consume glucose, your blood sugar will drop. Typically, I mean, it technically starts right away as soon as you're done absorbing your nutrients. That's typically when you can have the effect. But your body will signal that, hey, you're running low on blood glucose. I need to start releasing glucagon to then turn glycogen, or I believe it's glycogen. I might be uh, excuse me. I might be mistaking that word. I have it in here somewhere, but regardless, it's gonna convert your stored glucose. I think it's a glycogen, but I might be mistaken. Um, it'll convert like glycogen, which is stored, into active glucose, and that allows your blood sugar to stay stable. If you do something like what I did for fasting, is around the 12 to 16 hour period, your body kind of starts to freak out a little bit and it'll start going through its energy reserves to keep glucose going. So that's when it starts going after some of my stored sugar. Primarily for me, it's like in my stomach, um, or any excess energy reserves you have in your body, it'll start burning through those to maintain blood sugar. Um, and it'll do that until you've exhausted your stored energy, and then it'll start going after other things, or until your next meal, where then you get the extra glucose in the body. You don't need glucagon anymore. You'll start releasing insulin to then start storing that sugar for the next time you decide to do like me and not eat for 24 hours. Um, Again, that's a little bit more off topic or a little bit more detail than you need, but that loop of insulin glucagon will come back up in this class. So make sure that you know it. It's definitely in our notes. I'd have to go back and see what page it's on. Believe it's either like unit or like section 4 or section 5 for this one. And then the thymus, that just releases thymosin or thymosin, and that's important for T cell development in children. T cells are part of our immune system. Um, once you're once you grow up, um, you no longer produce more T cells. So your T cell production happens at a very young age. It helps tell your body determine what's called self versus non-self. So it tells the body like these cells are yours and these cells are Therefore, these other cells are not yours, and it helps the body recognize when there's a foreign invasion from like microbes or illnesses and whatnot. Um, but it'll produce all the T cells it needs as a child, and then the thymus shrivels away. And as an adult, you don't even have it, or you don't, it's so small you can't even see it. Um, and that's it. Those are all of the T cells we will have for the rest of our lives to protect us from all of the microbes and pathogens that are out there in the world. So it's a very efficient system, and we'll talk about that in a future lecture. So biggest takeaway for this is I personally like to have things like this on one slide. So if I have like 10 minutes to study, I can just go to this page or this picture, and I'm going to be able to study all of these different things in 10 minutes before I have to like run into an exam. So I do recommend you have something similar to this. Um, Note cards. I've seen people draw things. They draw the whole system and put things together. Or you can do something similar like that. If you want to copy mine and just add stuff that Dr. Curley gives us, feel free to take a picture or a snapshot of this. But just the biggest takeaway is that I have seen a lot of students struggle on endocrine, and most of it, if you look at the study guide, is covered on this one slide. It's where is stuff produced, where does it act, what happens after, what's the overall effect of that hormone, and kind of like we talked about today in class, what happens if you have less of it or more of it. Um, but if you can get most of this, if you can get this portion here that's in front of you, you'll do probably good, at least probably like a C on the class, or sorry, the C on the exam. And then obviously there's a little bit extra details that are covered in the notes that I would look at as well. Next week, what I'm going to cover, actually, give me one second. Oh, actually, this feeds perfectly into it. So next week, I'm going to cover some stuff on the exam study guide. So if you don't know, we do have an exam study guide. You could find this under modules, lecture for the endocrine system. It's in Unit 1, Intro Competencies and Exam Study Guide. You'll see the link. It has basically between 15 and 20 questions that Dr. Curley will throw in there that are designed to prepare you for the exam. Typically, what I'll do is I'll select 3 to 5. I'll say my top hitters. Again, I'm a busy person, so what I like to do is if I only had 15 minutes to study, these are the 4 or 5 things I would tell you to look at before we go into the exam. So we'll cover that next week for the exam study guide. If you want to have that printed, or if you want to have like a Google Doc or have it online or just to take notes, I would just look it over beforehand. That kind of helps you to get ready for the exam, especially like Thursday. Then you have next Tuesday, the following Thursday, and then we're taking our exam. So just 3 more lectures before we go into it. Um, and yep, there it is, Endocrine System Exam Study Guide. Go ahead and open it up, and you'll see the questions, and each module has this study guide. Okay, so that's really all I had to cover today. Again, this only took me um, yeah, probably like 20 minutes and a little bit more rambling than I needed. So the way this works for attendance is after the video, I will have a slide like you have in front of you now with a keyword. And all you have to do is message me in Canvas and just say, I watched the focus session 1. Actually, put it in the title because I had a lot of people send it last semester just as a blank email, and I had a really hard time finding it all at the very end of the semester. So if you can do it, just open up a Canvas message, put focus session 1, keyword or completion or something, and then in the message type in the keyword. In this case, it's pups, which is my nickname for my dog, Bailey, who's just laying on the floor ready for me to be done. For the future ones, I'll either do something similar where I put the slide on here with the keyword, or in the message or the announcement that I send out with the link, it's going to include a question about something I might have covered in the lecture, or something I might have said in the focus session. That just lets me know that you were paying attention. Again, none of this is to scare you away. It's just a way for me to track who's attended these because I have to report to my bosses like, yep, I had 10 students attend my focus sessions every week or whatever. Other than that, that's really all I had. It was a pleasure meeting you all today in class. I know it was really long, especially on Tuesdays. Um, and then next week we'll do this in person, and I'll send out a recording so you all can reference it later. Other than that, please feel free to reach out to myself or Dr. Curley if you have any questions. Until then, I'll see you all on Tuesday. Thanks for joining.